Mikrokosmos number 22 begins the next sequence of pieces in Book 1 of Mikrokosmos. And these next pieces are going to be some of the most challenging, but also some of the most musically rewarding pieces that we've encountered yet. The challenge and the musical reward is going to come from the fact that all of these pieces are going to use counterpoint. And counterpoint is a musical phenomenon where we have two or more independent melodies or independent musical ideas that are woven together simultaneously. In this first video, I'm going to take you through a tour of the piece musically and try to understand musically how the piece works. In the second video, I'm going to give you some ideas about how we actually practically approach this piece as a performer. So let's start by taking a look at Mikrokosmos number 22. The first thing you may notice, by the way, is that the piece is called Imitation and Counterpoint, so the word counterpoint is right in the name. The second thing I want to point out is that this piece is set up a little bit differently than the pieces that we've encountered so far. Usually, when we first look at a piece and we see two staves on the grand staff, we see the top staff is a treble clef and the bottom staff starts with a bass clef. So the treble clef is for our right-hand part, the bass clef is for our left-hand part. But you notice the bottom staff of the grand staff here is actually a treble clef as well. There's no bass clef. And that simply means that the left-hand part, since it is going to be a little bit higher up on the keyboard, mostly above middle C, it was just easier to write it in a treble clef than it was in a bass clef. There's no reason that we couldn't have written it in bass clef, but that just would have meant that there were a lot of ledger lines, so it's a little bit trickier to read. So just be aware that both of our hands are going to be reading treble clef in this particular example. I'd like to play this piece through for you, and I want you to listen for one thing. I want you to listen to the piece and figure out, is there any point at which both the left hand and the right hand are playing the same thing at the same time? And you may visually, just sort of scanning through the piece for the first time, you may visually get a sense of an answer to that question. But let's use our ears and see, is there any point at which the left hand and the right hand are working together? And my answer to that question would be no. These are two completely independent musical lines that are happening simultaneously. And you can hear there's always something new to listen to, and it's not entirely clear where our attention should be. Which one is sort of the main melody? Is it the left hand or is it the right hand? And the answer to that question is not entirely clear, and that's part of what makes this piece really interesting. That does not mean, though, that the musical ideas of the two hands are completely unrelated. Which brings us actually to the first part of the title of this piece. It's called Imitation and Counterpoint. I'm going to play one at a time. I'm going to play the first 3.5 measures of the left hand right here. And then I'm going to play the first 3.5 measures of the right-hand part right here. Tell me, do you hear any similarity between these two parts? So here's the left-hand part. And here's the right-hand part. Notice it's nearly the same melody. Now, it doesn't start on the same note. The left-hand part starts on B, and the right-hand part starts on G, but it's nearly the same melody. In fact, just as an experiment, if I moved this right-hand part, if I nudged it over by one measure and started it here, and I played both of the hands simultaneously, listen to what it would sound like. It would be parallel motion, where both hands are moving in the same direction at the same time. But that's not what Bartók does here. He makes it more interesting by staggering the entrances. The left hand starts, and then once the left hand starts, the right hand starts. With the same melody, but just a measure later. And that's where this part, or this word imitation, comes in the title. That is a musical technique known as imitation, where one hand starts a musical idea, and then the other hand imitates it, or follows along. Now, this piece does not have imitation consistently all the way through. If it did, well, we would call it a canon. But it does have other moments in the piece where we do have imitation like this. For instance, if we go down to the second line and we take a look at the right-hand part right here. Let me just play for you these 4 measures of the right hand, measures 2 through measures 5 of the second line. And then I'm going to play you measures 3 through measure 6 of the left hand. So here's the right hand starting in the second measure. Here's the left hand starting in the third measure. Again, it's nearly the same melody. It doesn't start on the same note. The melody in the right hand starts on a D, and the melody in the left hand starts on an F. And in fact, if I played these 2 lines together, again, if I did that thing where I nudged over the left hand part and started it right here, you would hear a sequence in parallel motion. But again, that's not what Bartók does. He makes it a lot more interesting by having that point of imitation where the right hand starts and then the left hand comes in. And even the parts of this piece that are not strictly imitation are still very independent. They don't imitate each other exactly the same way, but they are still very independent. Anyway, I think this is one of the coolest things that we can do as beginning pianists. Literally have our left hand and our right hand like being 2 completely different performers. This is not without its performing challenges, though. So in the next video, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a look at how do we actually execute this, because having that kind of hand independence is going to be one of the more challenging things that we've had to look at this semester. So that is what we will do in the second video. But I hope this is at least, it gives you a sense of what's going on in the piece, and I hope you're at least as excited as I am to take a look at this piece and try this out.